Please join me in welcoming Secretary Jennifer Granholm to the South by Southwest stage.
Thank you, Hugh. Thanks so much. Well, hello, everybody. I sort of want to get a feel for this audience. I'm wondering how many here work in energy? Oh, my goodness, look at you all. Just raise your hand if you're coming to this with a fresh face, meaning that you don't work in energy. Okay, it's about 50-50. All right, good. All right, so I want to start with sort of introducing you to the Department of Energy, in fact. So the Department of Energy, which I am so privileged to be the secretary of, has about 100,000 employees working at 17 national laboratories all across the country and at headquarters in Washington, D.C. And they are figuring out some of the most consequential solutions to the biggest problems. And historically, you know, we've started with the Manhattan Project, World War II. We have these massive, what we call user facilities in our labs that help to speed atoms and smash them. We have the incredible work that's being done on next generation technologies to provide a zero carbon economy. We do work on quantum. We do work on exascale computing. It's all really big stuff, but we are completely focused on the president's goals. Now, let me just, since some of you are working in this space, if I asked you, and Hugh actually said a piece of this, what are the Biden-Harris administration's goals with respect to the future of energy? What do you know? What are they? Do you know? Net zero by 2050, and then there's an interim goal. Do you know what it is? Well, there's a 2030 for CO2, but there's one also for how clean the grid is going to be. 100% clean electricity by 2035 and a net zero economy by 2050. All right? For those of you who are in this space, you know why this is important. For those of you who are not in this space, I'm curious about what you would say about why it's so important to get to these goals. What are the biggest reasons to get to a clean future? Quick, quick. Climate, yes. Ocean acidification, specific, good. My grandson. Your grandson, the future, right? There's a couple of other reasons too. So first, climate change, obviously, right? So last year, we spent, as a country, $165 billion on these extreme weather events. If you went back to like the 80s and 90s, it would have been about $8 billion. So these accelerate. And who pays for that? Right? You do. So number one. Number two, this has become really important in the past year, is national and global security. So we've seen what happens when a country weaponizes energy, right, with Putin's war in Ukraine. We've also seen that those countries in Europe who have had their energy pulled from them are accelerating their push toward clean, homegrown energy, which is clean energy. My counterpart, the energy minister from Ireland, his name is Eamon Ryan, and he says that one of the most important reasons to push toward clean, homegrown energy is because no country has ever weaponized the sun. No country has ever weaponized wind. Perhaps moving to a clean energy future is the greatest peace plan the world will ever know. So national security, energy security, reason number two to really go for these goals. Number three is reliability and affordability. So, you know, there's this rumor out there that it's expensive to go clean, but oh no. Look at, I don't know if you can see these because it's a little bit far away, but that first one which really dips, can you read what that is? That solar. Solar totally is now the cheapest form of energy, closely followed by, can you read it? Wind. Solar, wind, cheapest. Natural gas right next, and then followed closely behind, one of my favorites, geothermal. And we'll talk about that in a minute. So cost, It's much more affordable and getting more so as we move forward. And then, economic opportunities. So this is really important. You know, when the president says, when I hear climate change, I think about jobs. Because he sees and knows that this economic opportunity of building the clean energy future, not just for us, but for the world, is going to create millions of jobs. And so this is, in fact, as you can see up there, a $23 trillion global opportunity. And the president has said this opportunity is one that the United States is going to plant its flag in the ground on. We are going to create a strategy, an industrial strategy, that makes sure that we're building these products and not just allowing, you know, free trade to go to the lowest wage country, that we're going to build this economy in the United States. All kinds of jobs for all kinds of people in all pockets of the country. So why go clean? Really important lessons. All right, what I want to talk about are three things. What's on hand right now, what's on the cusp, and what's over the horizon. So on hand right now, related to what has just been passed, or what was passed in the past 2 years by Congress. So the two bills I'm talking about, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act. Bill and Ira. Uncle Bill, Uncle Ira. All right, so technology on hand. We're going to talk just briefly. Obviously, we know that solar is on hand, but solar is, as I mentioned, is the cheapest form. Thanks to the Inflation Reduction Act, you can get 30% off of home solar installation. Great. That saves you about $9,000 over the course of the time that the panels, the 10 years that the panels are on your home. Fantastic. DOE is also figuring out how to embed solar into all sorts of things, how to do bendable solar, how to put solar in glass. You're seeing it now in solar shingles, not just solar panels, solar shingles on your roof. You're seeing it in solar siding. You're seeing it in windows. Your house could become a virtual solar power plant, and you can still get those tax credits on it. In fact, Patagonia has just put up solar generating windows in their headquarters. So we're excited about embedding energy generation inside of building materials. So that's on hand. This is part of, remember I was just saying that we want to build up this supply chain, right? And, you know, over the past couple of decades, China has had a very strategic goal of having, you know, the bulk of solar panel manufacturing. Now, in the past, since the president has taken office, this slide here says that we've got 47 manufacturing plants that have announced they're expanding in the United States. There are 28 that are depicted on the map, 19 announcements. They're still scouting which state they're going to locate in. But this is part of bringing home the supply chain, which is, again, I'm a former governor of Michigan, and so we saw so many jobs leave in manufacturing when I was governor. It was when the auto industry was in bankruptcy, et cetera. So the notion of bringing home offshored or overseas jobs to the United States to make this have a whole supply chain here, it's very, it's gripping for me. Anyway, all right. Distributed wind. Who knew you could have a little wind turbine at your home? We're looking at these small-sized wind turbines across the United States. You can get 30% off of wind. And in fact, what's really cool, I love this, what if wind was embedded into building materials as well, so that you couldn't even see the turbines like that, but that you maybe have them in walls, et cetera. All of this is happening out there, great entrepreneurs. What about at-home storage? So especially in areas of the world, the country, that have experienced outages, like obviously Texas, if you could, in fact, get 30% off of an at-home, oops, wait a second, at-home storage for your home, that's terrific. And of course, the car is back there. That's the electric vehicle. And so thanks to those, if you are ready to turn your vehicle in, you can get $4,000 off at the dealership for a used electric vehicle. And you can get $1,000 off of home charging equipment. And you can get $7,500 off a new qualifying electric vehicle at the dealership. Now, when I say qualifying, part of the goal, of course, of the Inflation Reduction Act was to make sure that we were building up those supply chains here, and that means building up the content, the US content for the vehicles. So not every vehicle counts. And so, for example, these are some of the lower priced electric vehicles. So for example, $25,000 for a 2023 Chevy Bolt. If you add or you subtract $7,500 from that because of the tax credit that gets taken off at the dealership, now you're talking about a really affordable car for most people, right? And if you lease it, you know that many dealers, because they buy the vehicles, right, and they get the credit, and many dealers are now passing that on at a lease as well. So it becomes affordable. A lot of people have complained, of course, that when they think of electric vehicles, they're thinking of Tesla, they're thinking of very expensive vehicles, but not so. If people decide to explore an electric vehicle, this to me is the biggest part of the savings, is that right now with gas prices at about $3.42 on average, certainly more when things get more expensive, it's about $40 per charge less than what it would be to fill up an equivalent amount at a gas station. So if you're saving, say you fill up twice a month, you're going to save $80 a month just on gas because you are charging at home. That's pretty good. If you got two cars, or if you fill up more than once, that's a lot more. So on average, it's about $900 a year that you save just in fuel, and then on top of that, it's another $600 a year on average that you save because electric vehicles don't have as many moving parts. You don't have to take them to the repair shop as often, so on operation and maintenance, it's also much cheaper. So savings there. Now, you're driving an electric vehicle, you don't want to have range anxiety. What did the bipartisan infrastructure law provide with respect to that? $7.5 billion to make sure that we can have charging stations everywhere. Are you guys, am I hot or are you hot? If it's hot in here, I wonder if there's somebody who can take a look at the air conditioning, because I'm going to get hot just looking at you guys being hot. Okay, so the bipartisan infrastructure law said we're going to install 500,000 electric vehicle charging stations across the country. We have to do these electric vehicle charging corridors so that when you get in your electric vehicle and you get on the freeway and you're going a long distance, every 50 miles, there'll be an EV charger. Every 50 miles. And that charger has to be not more than 1 mile off of the freeway, and it has to be app-enabled, so you can know whether there's room available at the charging stations. There has to be at least 4 chargers for every one of them. So the states have all put in their plans. The money has been released. You're going to start to see all these chargers popping up across the country as we try to make sure that we take care of range anxiety. Okay. This slide I put in here because, of course, we have the same issue with respect to content made in the United States. So batteries for electric vehicles, the guts to the electric vehicle, of course, is a battery. Those batteries have largely been made, the whole supply chain, in China. The red bars are how China has really dominated. And whether it's mining, or material processing, or cell components, or battery cells, or EVs themselves, we want to do the whole supply chain in the United States. How can we get that stuff here? How can we make sure that we're responsibly mining for lithium or cobalt? How do we make sure that we have processing here, which we don't, to make sure that we can do that component of the supply chain? A battery has an anode, a cathode, separator material, an electrolyte. All of those are supplies, and all of those are jobs, potentially, that could be made in factories. So how can we make this happen since China has been so successful? Well, lo and behold, the Inflation Reduction Act and the bipartisan infrastructure law provides amazing incentives for the reshoring of these jobs. And check this out. Since the president took office, all of these dots reflect battery or battery supply chain companies who have said they're going to move to the United States or expand in the United States. $85 billion of announcements, 110 new expanded processing manufacturing plants for the battery supply chain for the electric vehicle. It's happening. For those of you who are policy whizzes and who are wondering, what policies really have an impact? I'm just saying, the Inflation Reduction Act is huge. It's huge for jobs. It's huge for incentivizing deployment of clean technologies across the country. It's also, pardon me for gushing, but I'm just so happy about this. I was a former governor of Michigan, and the dots all in Michigan there, kind of exciting. Because, of course, these places are going to a lot of the industrial heartland. You see, Georgia's going to be a big place for it. Tennessee's going to be a big place for it. All of those areas are really going to benefit. And so many of those areas are places that have been hollowed out by companies taking their manufacturing overseas. And now it's coming back. There's such a palpable sense of hope across the country. Make them here. Stamp them made in America. Export them elsewhere. It's a sense of pride, and it's deep. Okay. I have to say a word about grid improvements, because if we're electrifying all these vehicles, you might wonder, how are we going to have a grid that's able to take on all of that, right? Would that be a natural question? Yes. Well, and you recall last summer, California was asking their customers, the grid operator was asking their customers not to charge their electric vehicles, et cetera. Well, in fact, the answer to this could be not fewer, but more EVs. Now, why is this? In fact, you at Texas, for any of those who are from Texas, you're doing an experiment on something called a virtual power plant here. Are you saying yes to virtual power plants? Oh, I love it. Okay, all right. We got VPP experts. This is for you guys who don't know what virtual power plants are. You are going to go back to the dinner table and wow your family, because it is exciting. What if all of those electric vehicle batteries were aggregated and we're able to have a two-way conversation between the homeowner and the car owner and the grid? And what if that homeowner was paid for allowing the grid to take some of the storage from the battery of the electric vehicle and when it's necessary? And what if the homeowner was able to create a resilient situation because they had access to their own storage? These electric vehicles that have what is known as bidirectional charging, where it can take in and send out energy and have a conversation, a smart conversation with a smart grid, it's a whole new business model that is being contemplated by utilities and grid operators around the country. More of these devices, they're called, vehicles of course have electric batteries, you know what those are, but actually they're all, if you think about, for example, heat pumps in your home, you think about smart meters, they're all called DERs, or distributed energy resources. And you put them all together, and all of a sudden, a region has a really powerful source of resiliency to be able to make its way through potentially an extreme weather event. So we want to know how EVs can give back to the grid. Jigar Shah, who runs our loan programs office, we think we can turn electric vehicles as well as other resources into virtual power plants. We got $100 billion from the Inflation Reduction Act and the bipartisan infrastructure law to be able to make our grid, our nation's grid, more resilient in that way. Now, we also need, if we're going to replace the existing feed of energy from the grid from carbon-emitting energy to clean energy, we basically have to add about 2,000 gigawatts to our existing grid. But there are ways to make the existing grid capable of taking on more power. So for example, there's something called reconductoring. So a lot of people are saying, how come you don't just build more transmission lines, which we have to do, but what if we could make the existing power that runs across a transition line twice as efficient and run twice as much power over that same line. So then you don't have to worry about the NIMBY problem of siting transmission, et cetera. You could get a lot more power across existing lines. That's one way to expand the size of the grid. Another way we want to do is to make sure we're focused on resilience. So helping to fund undergrounding, for example, of transmission lines that are in very vulnerable areas. So super exciting to be able to focus on that $16 billion from the bipartisan infrastructure law. Just two things I want to talk about on efficiency, just for the moment. Efficiency, of course, we all want to see more efficiency. We want to see people's homes buttoned down. We want to make sure that we've got, all sorts of efficient windows, et cetera. But heat pumps are all the rage. Have you been hearing about them, or is it just me? Nobody's been hearing about heat pumps? You have one? Okay. You are ahead of the curve. Actually, they've been around a while, but what we want people to know is that heat pumps are not just about heating. They're about moving hot air around when it's cold and cool air around when it's hot so that you can have the most efficient experience, creates 45% greater efficiency, and here you go. Thanks to the clean energy laws, you can take 30% off the cost of your heat pumps. If you want to, if your HVAC system is about to go out, heat pumps are actually both heat and air conditioning. So you can get 30% off, and that's through 2032. And that's true for water heaters. Saves you about $650 a year. And heat pump sales, as you can see, now exceed gas furnace sales. Interesting. So we're excited about that. We're also excited that it's not just for warmer areas, but heat pumps are really surging in very cold climates as well. Induction stoves. Anybody here have an induction stove? All right, there's a few of you. So induction stoves, very interesting technology. Because if you are in the market for a stove, whether it's your old electric stove or your gas-fired stove, induction stove replaces those, has a super efficient profile, no pollutants, is much safer. You can, in fact, these are copper coils, and they don't heat the surface of the glass top, they heat the pan that they interact with, magnetic pan. And therefore, it's much safer. You don't get kids with their hands burned, et cetera. And, of course, I'm going to tell you that we offer meaning the laws, the rebates that are proposed, et cetera, $9 billion for low and moderate income families for rebates for those appliances. A single household can get up to $840 to replace their stove with an induction stove. And if you look at Consumer Reports, if you qualify for the full rebate, you could get effectively one of these gas ranges for just a couple $100 because of these incentives to go efficient. So if you add it all up, these are just some examples. $2,000 for heat pumps, $7,500 off a solar install, $7,500 off of EV costs. These are averages. $750 off a heat pump. All of that $18,000 saved on these appliances for everyday consumers that you should be thinking about if you are in the market, if you're doing a rehab, et cetera. And that's just for the amount of the purchase you save $18,000. Over $3,000 annual average savings once you have these in terms of their efficiency. So efficiency, a huge deal. Now, I have to say a word about the speed of some of these changes. This is from Tony Seba, who does Rethink X in the Bay Area, and he's a real visionary. And the whole point of this is that in 1900, this is a New York City street in 1900, and the question is, can you spot the car? Because, of course, they're all horse-drawn carriages. It's a little bit difficult to see, but that's the one car. That's in 1900. The speed of change, when you get some good technologies and incentives, this is 1913, 13 years later. Can you spot the horse? The horse is there, one horse, and all these cars. Change, when it means making people's lives better, happens fast. And that is super exciting when it comes to electrifying our transportation system, for example, Today, 1 in 7 cars is now an EV. In 2017, it was, much less. You can see the differentiation there. It's going to happen, and really over the past year, you've seen this really accelerate, and that's before these incentives were put into place. So we'll see what happens in this year. I wanted to make sure people were able to know about what's coming down the pike. Some of the rebates and tax credits are being drafted right now, and if you want to catch up with this, I encourage you to take a shot of that, and I'll bring it back up at the end so you can, so you don't have to scramble now to get your phone out. But I encourage you to sign up so that you can hear what's coming down the pike on that. So that's technology on hand. Technology on the cusp. What's cool that's happening, that's in the labs right now? What are we incentivizing right now that we know is going to make a huge difference with respect to climate change? What is on the cusp? So I have to say a word about batteries. When I'm not just talking about car batteries, I'm talking about utility scale batteries so we can save and store energy from the sun and the wind when the sun and the wind are producing more energy than what we need. And what if we could make those batteries out of really basic materials like salt or dirt or silica? What if we could do that? Well, if we could do that, and this is being worked on all over the country, we could really make a difference in basically making wind and solar and renewable energy clean, dispatchable baseload power. Because when you attach wind and solar to energy storage, they can be dispatched whenever you need it. And that will crack the code in so many ways on how we can get an additional 2,000 gigawatts of clean energy on our electric grid. So long-duration storage is what it's called, and we have launched what is known as an Earth shot, meaning that we set a big, hairy, audacious goal to be able to bring the cost of the technology of long-duration storage down so that we can accelerate this desire to make wind and solar basically like baseload power. We want to reduce the storage cost by 90% and have them deliver over 10 hours of storage. That would be a game changer. The second Earth shot that is super interesting is clean hydrogen. So hydrogen, of course, is hugely abundant, very small, and it's connected to so many things. So obviously water, H2O, 2 molecules of hydrogen, 1 of oxygen. And what hydrogen does is it separates out the hydrogen so that it can be used as an energy storage, as an energy carrier, or even as an energy producer, helpful in decarbonizing heavy industry, et cetera. And so our shot for that is 1 for 1 in 1, $1 for 1 kilogram of clean hydrogen in 1 decade. That's the second Earth shot. The third, we've got 6 Earth shot, I'm just going to talk to you about 5 just really quickly, is a carbon negative shot. So if you look at all of the projections about where the globe is going to be in 2050, the issue that, for example, the folks who are repeatedly every year looking at how we can get there, what technologies are going to be necessary, they all will say you have to be able to remove carbon from the atmosphere. All these, century of putting carbon and more of putting carbon into the atmosphere, we need to be able to remove it from the atmosphere. So this is a carbon negative Earth shot. How do we do what is known as direct air capture, actually suck CO2 from the atmosphere, and then maybe sequester it in a product like cement, or maybe inject it underneath the surface so that it is forever sealed away. But we have to take action to be able to remove existing CO2. And that's what the carbon negative shot is. That's, we want to be able to get that down to $100 a ton or less. And that would have a significant impact too. That's a little further out. And then enhanced geothermal. Totally love geothermal. Can I just say this? Geothermal, who said woohoo? All right, all right. So geothermal is the heat beneath your feet, obviously. And no matter where you go, you can if you drill far enough down, you're going to get hot. And if you can add water to that heat and create steam, it's going to turn a turbine and generate electricity. It is 24/7, it's clean, it's renewable, there's enough beneath the US alone to power the entire world, depending on how far down you go. So the question on this is what's the technology we need to go deep? And so this enhanced geothermal shot, we want to get a 90% reduction in the drilling costs of going deep, very fine, and we want to get that by 2035. There's just a huge potential for geothermal. And I will say geothermal big and geothermal small. When I say small, meaning that you can have a geothermal heat pump. So there's two types of heat pumps. There's a heat pump that you would put in your home that's air sourced, and there's a heat pump that is ground sourced, or basically geothermal. And so that those options are also 30% tax credits by the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act. But this is big geothermal that I'm talking about, that would power plants and put electricity on the electric grid. So that is a very cool one. And then finally, floating offshore wind. So you've seen that we're kind of late to the game as a country on offshore wind. Europe has been doing it very successfully. And the question for us is on the Atlantic coast, it's a little easier to do the fixed bottom wind turbines because it's a much more sloping and gradual entry into the Atlantic. But in the Pacific coast, it's much steeper. It's, the drop is very quick. And so for that, can we do floating offshore wind turbines? And that's what those models on the right look like. And can we do them inexpensively? Again, here too, there is so much potential in offshore wind to be able to power our entire nation. And our goal here is to get a 70% reduction in floating offshore wind by 2035. If we meet these goals, these big, hairy, audacious goals, we will be able to get to the big number and more. And if we do, we also can help to export this technology to our allies around the world to help others. And others are obviously, other countries are also looking to this, so it's, we're all working together, but we happen to have now the incentives to make this a likely shot. So it's very, very cool. So that's stuff that's on the cusp. And then technology that is on the horizon. Perhaps some of you may have seen an announcement in December that was related to nuclear fusion. Did you? Do you know what I'm talking about? All right. So exciting. So the president last April convened a whole bunch of muckety-mucks about how we can get to nuclear fusion on a commercial scale in a decade. It's a bold decadal vision. And then we aren't, and before I get to what we did, of course, but we aren't alone because there's a lot of private companies who are really interested in this too. We've got a lot of investment, $3 billion in 2021 in folks who are trying to crack the code on this. However, for those of you who are Trekkies, the Starship Enterprise's warp core was actually filmed here, but this right here is the national, just a part of the National Ignition Facility. That is inside of one of the Department of Energy's 17 national laboratories. It's the Lawrence Livermore National Lab, the National Ignition Facility. And they have been trying, like scientists throughout the globe, for 60 years, for 6 decades, to achieve nuclear fusion. And they did it in December. So what is it? What is nuclear fusion? All right, nuclear fission is the splitting of atomic particles in order to make energy, and that's the kind of civil nuclear power plants that you see now. And the downside to that, I mean, even though it's 20% of our baseload power right now, it's an important part of our clean energy because it emits no emissions, fission nuclear. But of course, it creates nuclear waste. And the question is, what do we do with the nuclear waste? Fusion, on the other hand, creates no waste. No waste. If we can do this and get commercial scale nuclear fusion, it would resolve everything. It would be an amazing feat. So for 60 years, they'd been trying to do it. And in December, what is it? It is that they fuse atomic particles together. And in that fusion, they generate more energy than the energy it took to fuse them. And the fusion happens, in this case, with 192 lasers, huge facility, 192 lasers, all pointing at something that's smaller than this, to be able to create this reaction. But they did it, and it proved that fusion can happen. Everybody's been trying for so long. So now the question is, okay, so you got 192 lasers in this massive facility. In fact, you know, this is replicating a process that occurs in the sun, fusing these particles together, and these lasers that are all pointed at this tiny little capsule. This facility is billions of dollars. I mean, it's just a huge facility. So the question is, how do you replicate that? This facility, that's one of the lasers. We'll pull back and you'll see this is just one segment of the National Ignition Facility. All of those long things are lasers, all these people working on it. This facility is huge. It's in the Bay Area in Livermore. So how do you go from that to something that doesn't cost billions of dollars and is much more, much more accessible, much more doable? And it's happening. That was all done with lasers. Fusion can be done by another way. It's with magnets as well. And a lot of the commercial fusion companies are using magnets to be able to achieve that fusion. And so it's called ignition, liftoff, and that is what we are all going to be working on over the next decade. Commercial fusion, as Scott Sue says, he's our lead fusion coordinator, is less a question now of time than of will. So, you know, we, generations of Americans, we have found the will to do the extraordinary. We did it in World War II. We did it in the space race. We did it in building the interstate highway system. We have found the will to do the extraordinary in pioneering the digital age. And honestly, reaching our clean energy goals, eliminating CO2 emissions, culminating in net zero by 2050, that would be our extraordinary. And I hope that we will find our will. That's it. So, all right, so we have a few minutes now to answer any questions, and hop on up.
Actually, over here, guys, that mic's not working. You'll have to come to this one. Apologies.
Bum mic.
Okay, go ahead, sir.
Sure. Hi, thank you so much for being here.
Yes.
My name's Jordan Brown. I work at the Environmental Defense Fund.
All right, EDF.
Yes, and I know you recently took a trip to Puerto Rico, and I was wondering if you had thoughts on the future of clean energy there to help keep those communities from suffering blackouts.
I'm so grateful that you asked that, and so grateful for the work of EDF on the island of Culebra to make sure that we have solar panels on rooftops. But here's the thing, in Puerto Rico, of course, for them, when you think about energy justice is life. I mean, when you think about the hurricanes that have hit Puerto Rico, we want to make sure that we help Puerto Rico, we, the federal government, help Puerto Rico meet their goal of getting to 100% renewable power by 2050. And what does that mean? What do they want to do? Our national labs have been working to map out how we can help them reach that goal. And so they have settled on rooftop solar. The Congress just gave the Department of Energy the ability to help with $1 billion to be able to do rooftop solar rollout in Puerto Rico. And we have launched a request for information about how we can best do this, consonant with what the people want and what the law requires. Actually, they passed a law saying they want to get to 100% renewable. So we're super excited to be able to work in Puerto Rico. The Department of Energy has been tasked with this by the president to help rebuild the future of the Puerto Rican grid. It is an embarrassment that it has taken, it's over 5 years since Hurricane Maria, that it has taken this long to be able to build a resilient grid. And it's going to be years into the future as well. But we are determined, the Puerto Rican people are determined, and we are grateful to be in partnership with EDF and others to make this happen. Thank you for the question.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. That was a wonderful talk so far. I really enjoy it. My name is Paul Davis. I work for Enphase Energy, but I'm here talking on my own. So one of the questions I have with is the power grid itself is like all over the map with regulations, different states, different credits for solar, different things like that. Could the federal government have policy that could try to make a national policy in these areas instead of it being state to state like it is right now?
Yeah, this is such an important issue because of federalism and because the state public utility commissions and the state and regional grids all have their own ideas about what the grid looks like, and yet we've all got to connect. I mean, we're here in Texas, for example, and the Texas grid doesn't connect to the rest of the country. And so when you have a hurricane and your power goes out and the rest of the country would like to be a good neighbor and send energy your way, this grid has decided that it doesn't want to take that help. And so we want to create a system which makes sense in this country. There is a national grid study, a needs study that was just completed. But on top of that, the bipartisan infrastructure law, Uncle Bill and Uncle Ira have given us funds to be able to incentivize the building out of a better grid. And it doesn't so much deal with the NIMBY problem, although it provides incentives if regions work together. And that's true with the problem, for example, of interconnections. I'm sure some of you may be aware that some of the regional transmission organizations are stopping the adding of clean energy because they feel like there's a bottleneck and there's not enough transmission to be able to take off that clean energy. All of that is what we have a new grid deployment office that we are orchestrating, and you know, FERC is an independent entity, but FERC is also working on the rules of the road for what that next transmission looks like. And then finally, because so much of it does happen at the local level, there is an opportunity for the U.S., for the federal government, to be able to incentivize and quickly permit transmission on federal land. And so the president has asked all of the permitting agencies to abide by what was adopted in the Federal Power Act, which is an accelerated permitting strategy for transmission. So all of that is happening in addition to these new models of transmission, virtual power plants, making sure that we are reconductoring lines, et cetera. So all of that is what the Grid Deployment Office inside of the Department of Energy is working on. Sir.
Yep. First of all, what an honor. Thank you so much. You filled the room with life. Thank you for that.
Wow, that's so...
I run an ocean energy startup, and we actually...
Were you the guy who yelled about ocean acidification?
I was not.
Okay.
Thank you for that, whoever it was. I run an ocean energy startup.
What's the name of it?
Laminar Scientific.
All right, Laminar Scientific.
We actually got Department of Energy funding.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Thank you again. I'm just wondering, how often do you talk about ocean energy in your office? Like, what is the priority of ocean energy in your office? It's very reliable and steady.
100%. 100%. Now, tell me what you guys are working on specifically.
Wave energy conversion.
Wave energy conversion.
Yeah.
So, wave power, constant, right? It is a little expensive, as you know, at this moment. It's actually, we are contemplating another Earth shot related to this to bring down the cost, because if we can harness waves or tidal power or just the movement of water, then it's another way. I often say that our clean energy future is not about a silver bullet, it's about silver buckshot. And this is one of the important pieces of that because it is so abundant. We have been funding a number of companies in this space, and in fact, there's such possibility to use tidal and the movement of water in rivers to power remote communities, for example. So we've got something called PackWave in the Pacific, which is a facility that is measuring the movement of wave and the equipment that is capturing that energy. We're very excited about it. So glad that you were funded. Now, all right, so it's 2023. By 2025, you guys are going to take off and show the rest of the country how we can capture energy through water.
That's right. We have a customer already, so thank you.
Okay,
Appreciate it.
customer's good.
Hi, Secretary.
Hi.
Thank you. My name is Miranda Green. I'm a reporter with Floodlight News. I wanted to ask, a lot of the earth shots that you mentioned are basically to counter the impacts of air pollution from fossil fuels. And, we are in Texas, which is one of the largest producers of natural gas and oil in the company. So I wanted to ask you, what role do you think that the Biden administration will ultimately play in cutting back the U.S. on production?
Yeah, this is such a great question because we're at this moment, right, where our allies across the world are desperate for liquefied natural gas, and we want to be a partner to our allies, and at the same time, those very allies want to accelerate toward clean. And so the question is, how do we manage that immediate, and how do we accelerate into the future where we don't have the externalities? So part of it, and this we are having a discussion right now with our allies about, is managing and making sure that we have LNG that does not have methane leakage and that does not have CO2 emissions. If we do that, and if it can be certified by a trusted third party that in fact those externalities have been taken care of, it's one way of being able to solve for both energy security as well as clean energy. But we're not there yet. We're not there yet. So we're in this moment where we have to address energy security and we have to accelerate toward clean. Ultimately, though, as I was mentioning, most countries see if we can solve for clean right now, then, or in the near future, then that really is energy security. Most countries do not want to be reliant on other countries, whether it's the United States or anyone else, for their energy supply. They want to be able to have their own, and the best way to do that, because not all countries have access, of course, to the kinds of fossil resources, certainly that the United States has, the best way to do that, of course, is to help everybody accelerate toward clean.
Does it not bother you that by holding, these partnerships with other countries and national security is also increasing natural gas production, especially in ports in Texas, and essentially binding the United States to be a major fossil fuel producer for the next coming decades?
Yeah, it's a really important question. And the issue is, if you don't have energy security, then it's difficult to get to the transition. Because people in Maslow's hierarchy of human needs, people need to be able to turn on the lights. They need to be able to warm their homes. And so if you don't address that at the same time as you are pushing toward clean, then you're not going to get to the clean because people will see it and there will be a backlash. And so we've got to provide security and accelerate at the same time.
Thank you.
Hi.
Hi, I saw you in the bathroom.
Yes, nice to see you again. My name is Jennifer Briney. I'm the host of the Congressional Dish podcast, and I have been an EV driver for the last 5 years. And I do have to admit that charging this thing has been the bane of my existence. I don't live in a single-family home, so I don't have a garage. And so having access to chargers has been very difficult. I also drive a Honda Clarity electric, and so when I do find chargers, often they are Tesla chargers, which I cannot use. The superchargers I cannot use, and yet they can use the chargers that I can access. And so the supply is very limited. And so my question is twofold. One, is there any kind of regulation in the works to get these multifamily dwellings to install chargers? Because I promise you the private market is not doing it on their own. And second, is there a standardization that's going to happen with the chargers so that when we have this nationwide network, that I will be able to use it and not just have the Tesla people use it all?
Yes to both. So let me tell you quickly. So in a very short amount of time, without breaking any news, we are going to be launching the second part of the EV charging initiative. And that second part, so the first part was for transportation corridors, so they're 50 miles apart, like I was saying. The second part is for both rural and urban and multifamily chargers. So we want to make sure that we have to step in where the market won't. And we have to make sure that they are available in urban areas and so that everybody can have access to them. So that's the second part, $2.5 billion for states around the country to solve for that. The second piece is it requires that these chargers be specific and be all the same. Tesla has agreed to convert, not all, but like, how much? How much? 7,500 of their chargers to be fungible, to be able to serve all comers. So we're going to see, certainly in the, I don't have the slide up, but with the slide with all of the charging corridors, you're going to see very similar charging all the way through the country so that you won't have to figure out which one to go to. But Tesla has also joined in, and they're going to convert their existing stations, 7,500 of them, to be able to address the issue. So hang with us, because it should happen you'll start to see this happen over the next couple of years as this starts to roll out. All right.
Hi.
Hi.
My name is Kai Megundo. I'm a student at Davidson College.
All right.
And I want to ask, what is the Department of Energy or just the administration in general doing to kind of address the kind of worker shortage that is happening? I've noticed kind of a lot of people my age are going to many things, but a field that I hear very rarely is energy. And I'm kind of hearing this grand promise of green energy, green energy, green energy. But the question kind of remains, who's going to work there? You know, what are we doing to increase the kind of participation and emergence of this field? And how are we getting people to begin working in that area?
Yeah, this is a great question. All right, so it is a huge problem. It's a huge problem for every sector, right? Because we have such a low unemployment rate. And in energy, I'm bummed to hear you say that people aren't interested in going into energy, because it truly is all kinds of jobs for all kinds of people in all pockets of the country, for everything from scientists and researchers all the way across the spectrum to the folks who like to work with their hands, the tradespeople. I mean, in every single one of these spaces, whether it's wind or solar or manufacturing or installing EV charging stations or putting up the grid or you name it, there are so many jobs. So there's an incentive in the Inflation Reduction Act that if projects include apprenticeships, that they will get an extra 10% off of their tax credit. So it incentivizes union labor, it incentivizes training on the job. So that's number one. Number two, I know the Secretary of Education is here, and between him and the Secretary of Labor and we are working together on strategies for training programs specifically for the areas that we know we have massive gaps in, because that's a big supply chain problem, is the lack of workers in this space. But I hope, are you a millennial?
I'm Gen Z.
You're Gen Z, all right. You guys, though, the Gen Zers, the millennials, you care so deeply about mission, right? What is a greater mission than saving the planet? We want people to work in this space, so I hope you'll spread the word. Good paying jobs, saving the planet, feeling good about yourself. Come on, what's not to love?
Thank you very much for coming. This has been a masterful intro to energy policy. I plan to forward this to as many people as I know. I don't know very much about VPPs. I am fortunate to be married.
But weren't you here just like nodding VPPs?
I am fortunate to be married to Rishi Sharma Frank.
Oh, okay.
So anyway,
You have an in.
I am a DOT attorney by day, and so I am very excited for some of the partnerships that we have with DOE.
Yes.
I know DOE has been at the center of a lot of really interesting newer partnerships with government and with the private sector. I'm wondering which of those, I think, have excited you the most.
Well, I must say, I'm in the Department of Transportation. Obviously, we have a joint office now that is focused on these charging stations. But the thing that I think intersects us most, that I'm most excited about, because I was from a car state, is this bringing home of supply chains for American workers. I just am so happy about that, because when Michigan was on its knees, it was the Obama-Biden administration that gave Michigan a lifeline to be able to save the auto industry. And having looked in the faces of so many people who've lost their job through no fault of their own, I just feel like having good paying manufacturing jobs in this country allows us to lift people and families, states, and a country from its knees.
Thank you. This was such an energizing speech. I just have a really quick two-part question. One of them being, what really keeps you up at night when you think about the climate crisis and if we're moving quickly enough to address it? And the other one is, what are you hopeful for in tackling this climate crisis?
Thank you for that. And I know this will have to be the last one, because I know people have other ones to go to. What keeps me up at night is making sure we do have clean, dispatchable baseload power and being able to dispatch it anywhere. And so that's number one. What makes me hopeful is what's embedded in the Inflation Reduction Act and in the bipartisan infrastructure law is the ability to lift communities, not just manufacturing communities, but communities that are fence line communities, meaning communities that have been disproportionately bearing the burden of pollution, et cetera. And what it does is direct investment in communities that have been left behind and disadvantaged communities. For example, if you're a wind or solar developer and you choose to locate on tribal lands or in a disadvantaged community, in former fossil community, and you use American content, you can get a 70% tax credit. That is going to change the game for so many communities, and that gives me huge hope. Thank you all so much for coming.